Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Welcome to the facilitated collaborative process. This is actually going to be a meeting led by our facilitators, but we have to get all the members who are here on the record. So we're just going to ask for quick introductions. We'll first go through the room and then ask members who are on the phone to identify themselves. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Christopher Constant.
Meg Zalatel.
Crystal Kennedy.
John Weddleton.
Okay, I see that Suzanne LaFrance is here. Members on the phone, can you please identify yourselves?
Forrest Dunbar.
Okay, and then we have some members from the administration, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves as well, and then we'll turn it over to our facilitators.
Larry Baker, Office of Mayor.
John Morris.
And Craig Campbell, Office of Mayor.
Great, thank you everyone. I'd like to reintroduce to everyone Tom Barrett and Melinda Breaux, who have been our facilitators through this process, and they're going to take it away from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm happy to be with you. Myself, I'm going to give you a little context about what we've done and where we are. And we've got a presentation, I think that we've got, that Belinda will walk people through. And then maybe hear from some of the legislative drafting committee that we worked with from the Assembly and also from the administration quickly. And then we're happy to take questions or respond. We're interested always in feedback. And if you recall, this is not our first visit. And we had started out briefing you on the process we were going to follow. And, you know, a kind of straightforward, business-oriented decision process. Clearly identifying the problems, looking at a broad range of alternatives, working those down to what was feasible and realistic, making that data informed, and then assessing them with the values that we held as a group, and then obviously, ultimately, you need a plan of action to execute them. A couple of context things. We are pleased with where it's gone, and hopefully you will be. It's a work in progress. So what we're presenting to you is where we are now in our thoughts and proposals. But we started out with a broad context, which I hope everybody shares. And we were looking for the common higher ground, right? And fundamentally, that came to improving conditions for our community as a whole. This is a challenge for the community that has impacts on the community. We'd like to get that better. Improving the care and the opportunities for the homeless, the residents in our community that live among us. And so impact on the community, but impact and care for the residents. Clearly, we wanted to come up with a plan to vacate over time here the Sullivan Arena. And also fundamentally, and I hope this is important, be able to take pride as a community of anchorage that we can address and solve a challenge like this in a positive way that benefits everybody. That's prudent, that's smart, and that is cost effective and works for you. In large terms, in fundamental terms, if you recall, we started out basically when we began the discussion with kind of two tactical level constructs. One was a very large navigation center, a single large navigation center to replace Sullivan. A second was kind of multiple dispersed navigation centers around the community. And what we came up with, we're working through this process, and it was challenging, but I would compliment the members of the Assembly Drafting Committee and also the administration for working through with this, being transparent, staying committed, and sticking with it. And what we've come up with is a proposal you'll hear about in a couple of minutes for what we call a client and community-focused approach. And basically, the fundamental shift is to look at the different segments of the homeless population that we're dealing with and approach each of them individually based on their needs. also, if they have particular medical concerns, address that soon. If they're working, right, they're working poor, they need housing, look at that group and what can we do about that. But basically look at the segments and get approaches that deal with each of them individually at a variety of locations and a variety of sites ultimately. And also take into account, I want to compliment, there's a lot of other people working this space very hard. There are other shelters in the community. There are people who've been working very hard at this for years. You've got a coalition in the community, a lot of public-private partnerships working a number of spaces, housing, supportive housing. I would just compliment all of you. What makes our approach to this possible is this other system or these other activities that are in place. So fundamentally what we've got is something that we think answers our first issue, which is congregate and a solution that helps us with Sullivan, but in a smart way. And what you're going to hear about, in business terms, you would call this a system approach, system-wide approach. Oh, sure. It's a system-wide approach, and it's a more integrated system-wide approach. It will work only if not just the assembly and the administration, but the community, public-private partnerships, other organizations and efforts addressing homelessness. If we can integrate that effort, then I think together we can succeed. And I'll let Belinda walk you through the details of that. The one thought I would leave you with is we'd like some feedback, but ultimately, and we've still got some work to do to close this stuff up, ultimately, it takes a commitment to action to actually make these ideas real. And we have posted out, we had some engineering reviews on some of the sites. I think we've got a site where that's linked in for you to take a look at. And then obviously the presentation today. So, but I appreciate the chance. We appreciate the chance to work on this. And hopefully we've done something that will be helpful to all of you. We've been neutral in terms of the decision. We're not the decision authorities in this space. We understand that. But hopefully it will help you make better decisions in this space. So Belinda?
Really quickly, just for those on the phone, if you don't have the handout we're going to be reviewing in front of you, it is on the Committee for Housing and Homelessness website under items of interest, that and the agenda. And then for all members and everyone, the engineer's report is quite lengthy, so we've only posted a link on the website and decided to save some trees. So you can find the documents there. Thank you.
And sorry to interrupt, but this is Austin from Davidson. I'm not on the line in case I missed the roll call.
Thanks, Austin.
Okay, good morning. So I'm going to walk through the presentation that was handed out earlier. I think Tom did a really good job of setting context for us. Starting on page 2, at a high level, the group came in with the two broad strategies, one around the single navigation center, the second being multiple sites dispersed around town. And throughout the process, the group identified a hybrid that we believe has the best value for the community, and that is what we're calling the client community-focused approach. If you turn to page 3, that slide is it's a busy slide, but it is a good summary of what this approach entails. It has a navigation center point of entry strategy, but one where there's no wrong door. And then the services that are provided, as you'll see, they're targeted to what individual demographics need, so that we're giving, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to every person who's experiencing homelessness, but it's targeted to the root causes that will help individuals get out of homelessness and into stability. And that was, one of the overall goals of this effort was that the system that the group would come up with would be something that's part of the solution, part of the system continuum of care of ending homelessness, not simply sheltering people who are homeless. So you'll see on this slide in the bottom right-hand corner is recognition that there's already a robust established system in the community for supporting adults who are experiencing homelessness. And just remember, this effort was focused on adults experiencing homelessness, so we don't speak to the system around taking care of our youth. We had, of course, the single adults population. We would see that being potentially the tensioned membrane sort of structure from our site analysis that could be located at either the Tudor Elmore site or at the Burgaw site. And this would be the navigation center design that I think had been talked about previously. We also have a focus on what we're calling the special population, and that would be defined as the LGBTQ, elders over the age of 65, women and couples. And potential locations for that center would be either the Burgaw location or Johnson's Tire. And again, you'll see each of these that we're saying they should be designed around the navigation center sort of approach. So that it's not simply bringing people in for shelter, but it's helping them navigate to the kinds of supports and services that are needed so that they eventually become stabilized and out of homelessness. This approach would have then a center that's focused on those that are more medically fragile, so that we could provide very specific services and supports for that segment of our population. One potential location that could use is the former Alaska Club on Tudor Road. We have substance misuse, both treatment and housing. This element of the system would be potentially standing back up the old Salvation Army site. And then we've got an element recognizing the need for housing. And so some really focused efforts around permanent supportive housing and workforce housing. I think as Tom mentioned, there are individuals currently in our mass care shelters that have an income. It's just not an income that's adequate for being able to afford either an apartment or some sort of housing in the community. And so providing some workforce housing in that arena. All of the numbers that are shown on this slide are just very approximate. The group recognizes that as this approach is further fleshed out and moved toward implementation, there's a lot more work needed to make sure that we have the capacity numbers adequate. Most of the rest of this presentation is some background information. I will touch on it quickly, and then if there's anything we want to come back to when we get to the discussion section, of course, we can come back and provide additional context. Just as a reminder, we started out with getting aligned around two problem statements. The first was around exit from Sullivan Arena for this coming season, and the second was more the longer term intervention. And what you see from the solution that was brought forward is it is addressing both of those problem statements. And the solution that the group came up with really, it builds on things that are already working well in the community, but attempts to address the gaps that were known in the continuum of care system today. Some key planning assumptions that went into the effort, particularly for problem statement number 1, are shown at the bottom of page 4. We were looking at primarily congregate shelter needs in this effort. And when we looked at replacing the Sullivan Arena capacity, the estimate for that was around 400 beds plus surge capacity for around 140 people. We recognize that there are additional individuals housed in non-congregate sites, and that we know that in the site number 1, that there is going to be an earlier downsizing of that facility than what was originally anticipated. While that is, the group was aware of that, it was a parallel effort, the group did not directly try to solve that problem as part of this specific effort, just for clarity. Going to slide 5, the criteria that we used. These are the criteria that we reviewed with you all back in August, and we took the feedback that we heard from that session and used it to improve the criteria that we're using. But primarily the criteria are summarized in these 5 broad areas. First and foremost, looking for solutions that would be effective, both in terms of being able to successfully operate the facilities or the system, but also providing a quality of care to the clients, to the individuals who were being supported in these systems in a way that would help them have a better quality of life and long-term stability. We also looked at factors that would improve public impact and public acceptance, things like looking at the locations from the standpoint of what kind of buffer zone was around them, how are they set up in a way such that providing security would be relatively easy. And then we looked at system alignment. How well would any of the options that the group discussed fit into not just the immediate get out of Sullivan problem statement, but also a fit for the long term. And then obviously the schedule and the cost of the systems are critical criteria. Moving to page 6, just at a high level to give you a summary of the alternative sites that were reviewed. Over 70 discrete locations were considered in the review of potential locations. From that review, 5 sites were identified that were potential sites. And then, as Tom mentioned, there were funds put forward to support an engineering study. It was performed by the Boutte Company. They looked at site analysis, and they looked at the existing facilities and structures from the standpoint of safety, code compliance, and estimating what it might take to convert that facility to the use for a navigation center and shelter. That's the study that Tom mentioned that has been placed on the Assembly website, so that if you are interested in reading the, I think, 400 to 500 pages of detailed engineering information about the sites, and it is there for you as well. One thing just to flag with that study is it is a what we would call a very early preliminary engineering study. The estimates and the schedules that were laid out are really very rough order of magnitude. They're not based on any kind of detailed design work at this point. So we're really more of a screening study. One of the other things that we learned from that engineering.
Can you stay close to the mic? We're hearing from the phone that they can't quite hear as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a habit. We all kind of sit back. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. One of the other things to note from that engineering study is that there was only one location that in and of itself would have the potential to replace the capacity at Sullivan Arena, and that would be the Johnson's Tire site. That site would require some pretty extensive refurbishment, including to deliver that kind of capacity would require having a second floor added to the building. So if you look at that study, you'll see while it might be feasible from a capacity standpoint, there was a quite costly to refurbish that facility for achieving that full capacity. Slide number 7. This is kind of the bottom line of why the group felt that this approach is the best one. Some of these points we have mentioned. Talk about it. It does include this navigation center concept. We feel that this hybrid solution will be the most effective at reducing homelessness and improving the quality of care. Because we're providing the right supports to the individuals in the way that they need them. We believe this solution also will have strong community support because it does align with the community strategic plan, the Anchored Home Plan. This solution also allows you to start bringing down the population in Sullivan Arena incrementally as each one of those elements of care can be turned on. You can start pulling individuals out of Sullivan, and probably this solution looks to be the one that will get you most quickly to a viable solution that gets you out of Sullivan, and gets you out of Sullivan in a way that you can be comfortable, provides good care to the individuals that are there. While we only have rough order of magnitude capital cost at this point, the capital cost, it looks like it's roughly equivalent to the other options. This option, because it is expected to have broad philanthropy and public support, that there's an opportunity for leveraging some funds from those areas as well. And then the operating cost will be optimized at each of the locations because you're providing only the services that are needed for that particular group. Okay, slide number 8, the page with all the numbers. This is just a snapshot of how this approach lays out in terms of number of beds, total number of individuals served per year, and some ideas around cost. We have some ideas around the capital cost investment, although they're still, like I said, they're rough order of magnitude and there's a broad range. On the operating cost, there's still some work to be done to come up with those estimates, and I think the members of the group will speak to that when we get to the Q&A session. Then on page 9, just some thoughts on the finance plan, and I know that the group will share some more thoughts in this area as well. There's a broad array of sources for providing both the capital and the operating funds that are needed for this alternative. And then the last page we will come back to at the end of the meeting, but this at a high level is what we see as the next steps in the timeline. Kind of the bottom line is trying to move this approach forward to having a resolution that the Assembly would approve at the end of the month. And the dates before that are the activities to provide for the kind of stakeholder engagement and public engagement that will put you in a good position to hopefully be ready to approve by the end of the month. And then the real work starts. As Tom always says, the easy day was yesterday. And so moving forward with the implementation, hopefully starting in November, is where I think we would need to have true commitment to stay the course and move this forward, because this is, while this appears to be a really good approach for the community, it will not be easy to implement, and it's going to require that we really lock arms and are aligned in wanting to move this forward. So with that, I will open it up to the members of the group who wanted to make some comments.
Thank you. Belinda, briefly, somebody sent me a note that said we need to update our slide number 8 in particular, under the substance misuse treatment and housing. To be consistent with the previous number, it should be 68 instead of 40.
Thank you, I appreciate that correction.
And that then moves the bottom number to 758. Thanks.
So we wanted to give, like Belinda said, each of our partners, if you will, a chance to comment, and these are the partners we're in the room with. There are a lot of partners that will be needed to make this work together. But from the administration, any comments? I can't see who all is down there, Larry and
Craig and John.
One last interruption, just so everyone knows, Mrs. Aller and Mr. Peterson are also on the phone at this time.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So from the mayor's office there, any comments?
Thank you, Admiral Barrett. We're very excited about this. This plan is frankly a better plan than what we presented a few months ago. And it represents a lot of work with the Assembly and the administration. And I think it's a great path forward for our city, and we're looking forward to getting this draft out to the broader community and hearing what everyone else has to think about it.
Anyone else there?
Just very briefly, yesterday when we were meeting, we kind of been at this process for about a month now, or a month and a half, I guess it's been. And I guess for the community wide, Belinda didn't mention this, but we kind of collectively added up the hours that have gone into this effort for the last month and a half of the 8 people. And we came up with over 500 hours of time that's been spent in trying to develop a plan that serves the community well, and I think is much superior to where we started from. And a collaborative effort between the assembly members and us on the administration. I think I would just say in my 40 or 50 years involved in public service that it was one of the finest efforts that I've ever seen. And I just take my hat off to the members of the Assembly that as we've gone through this process. And obviously, when we started, we didn't agree. We were light years apart, and there was a few moments along the way that perhaps things got a little testy, but that's okay. That's part of the process. But I just, on behalf of the mayor reviewed this plan yesterday and met with the group and endorsed the steps forward. And so we have alignment. And I really hope that the full assembly will pay good recognition to the hard effort of the 3 members of the legislative drafting group, because they really put in a yeoman's time and effort. And as we said, it's no small task when you can develop a product after 500 collective hours. That's a lot. That's a lot of time for the community, and I really believe it's a good work product, and I was really pleased to be part of the process. Thank you.
Great. No comment. How about from the other partners from the Assembly that we work with here, the legislative drafting group? Meg or Chris or John?
Then people are pointing my way. It's interesting. I think what we have here right now is fairly profound, where we've got a good direction and unity, and the city really pitching in on this issue, and it's so uncolorful for the media here. It just looks very bland. I think there was an article in the paper, maybe yesterday or today, the Daily News, that showed how many people have died outside in the last 4 or 5 years, and 17 by hypothermia, freezing to death, essentially. And it really shows the importance of what we're doing here and the urgency to get something going that provides a warm place for everybody at all times. It's really distressing. And I know everyone shares that motivation. I really just rough on this thing, and it just reiterates what was said before, but when the kind of the alternative was shown back in June and July, and I've always appreciated the administration coming out before they were even seated and saying, this is a critical issue, we want to deal with it, and here's a way forward. I think that's pretty brave, but it was obviously perceived as being this huge mega shelter, wrong place, and so on. And that's not where we are. There is no mega shelter. There's potentially a Tudor Elmore, a shelter that I think is in a size very reasonable for the community. I believe it really signifies a real win for the community councils in the areas and others concerned about that. It continues what we've had. There was a lot of concern about having a scattered site system, which we really have had for many years, but this kind of plays on that, because, okay, we're not going to have everything in one place, we're going to continue with that pattern. It's also part of the system. Instead of one location, perceived as one location where everything is, this highlights that we have different areas for different types of people, different kinds of solutions, and to step up from, essentially, be a mat on the floor again, but, that image all the way up to somewhere where you can launch independence. There's a lot of pushback to the Elastic Club from those neighbors, and that in some regards in this, it's still in play, but it would not be a shelter. It would be a place for medically fragile people, should that be chosen. It's not really locked in, but it's a very different concept than having what people perceive could have been there. This also clarifies that we have a public-private partnership dealing with the homeless, and in fact, for the time that I've been attentive to it, has really been mostly the private nonprofits that we're doing it, very little city money. We ramped it up over the last few years, but this recognizes, and I appreciate the mayor making this a priority. He recognizes we need to deal with this, and if it takes city public money, that's just what we have to do. We had 17 people freeze to death in the last few years. But anyway, this highlights that we're in, and I think that really is drawing in and making it more attractive for the nonprofits and private businesses that would contribute. This also is fairly flexible, because I think we are at a peak right now because of COVID, and that's what got us into this whole arena. And this provides a system as we draw down and have fewer, that different, instead of one big place or a few different pieces can be adjusted over time. A couple places that are still challenges is one is this remains weak on mental health, and I think we recognize that. That's a huge challenge, huge amount of money, and we haven't really focused on that, but work is being done by others in that, dealing with that arena. We also, money is a big issue. I mean, where is the capital money coming from? And we have to have committed operating funds. We can set this up, but if we're not committed to having available the operating funds for the long haul, we've made a big mistake, because a well-run shelter is not a problem for a neighborhood, and it's productive, and it gets people up and out on their own. But if we don't fund them well, then we can have a disaster at any location. And that remains a challenge, but we're up to it. We'll do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that one of the things that really needs to be highlighted, and John did mention it, but I want to underscore it, is that if you look at the comprehensive approach that's laid down here in draft format, this really is almost identical to what the Coalition on Homelessness plan is, the anchored home plan that we've adopted, that we are embedding within this proposal, the key elements of that plan. And so, again, it's in draft format, but it's really, to me, exciting that we've come to the point where everyone recognizes we don't just need a place for people to go in crisis, but we need places for people to be able to move out of crisis into stability, and that stability factor is built deeply into this plan, including hundreds of units of permanent supportive housing, transitional housing to help folks, workforce housing to help the people who are just on the skids right now and are working still. And so this comprehensive approach is, I think, exactly in line with where folks have been moving. And while you look at the column for costs, I want to point out that we do have draft costs for each of these areas, but we're not in alignment yet on how and where and when those funds are going to come. And so we decided that's content for further work that we're continuing to do. But I would like to echo what Larry Baker said, that this is a true product of collaboration, of working hard through differences, not avoiding differences. There were moments of high passion, and we worked right through those to get to the point where we are today, little sang-froid, with a good proposal. So as we move through the details, I'm sure there are going to be tons of questions, and we'll be prepared to answer as best we can or get back with responses through the process. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for your good faith efforts in this process.
Meg, offer some comments, please.
Sure, thank you. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank our facilitators. They've done a fantastic job, and to thank the subject matter experts who supported the work in the facilitation. We did not do this alone. I would also like to acknowledge that this being a client community approach starts with the community plan to end homelessness, which is Anchored Home. And tying this strategy to that plan is very important. It builds on the foundation of the work that's already underway, and it leverages existing resources and investments to move forward. As we look at this exit strategy, it's not a solution to homelessness. It does have some elements built in that, that will get us towards the solution to homelessness. The solution to homelessness is housing. So there's housing built in here. That is very important. But it also takes care of that immediate need, which is how do we start to exit from mass care? And that was the initial problem we were tasked with. So I am happy that we are able to move beyond the initial tasking of getting out of mass care to integrate part of the solution into the response. I think that is paramount and very important. I'm also very excited about this plan in that it allows us to leverage some non-traditional funding sources as we look at medically needy or medically fragile populations, as we look at adding substance misuse treatment into the homeless response. The integration of services along the continuum of care, I think, can't be underscored enough. And it became a very acute issue as we moved through COVID. As we saw increases in those needing services, we got a very defined picture of the types of needs people have that haven't always been at the forefront. So this is an opportunity to build on some of the work in system integration already, but to affirmatively say that to exit mass care, we need to build these services in and have an integrated approach. For all of those reasons, I'm really excited about this. It was a challenge to get here, but I am happy we are here. I am also happy that we are able to do this with the community. This is not the municipality on its own proposing to move forward. This will be a collaborative effort. And the next steps will be key. The next steps will be, and I'm not trying to get too far ahead on the agenda, but I want to highlight that the next steps are for us to ask the community and the assembly to come along with us and say, this is a policy statement. This is the way we want to move forward. And then we get into the weeds on the implementation. So I invite you to reach out to us, to talk with us. We are still getting more information on the 7th of this week. An RFI, or request for information, will go out to see if there are spots we missed, like locations, buildings that meet these parameters. So by no means has this work been exhaustive. We continue to do the work, and we invite the community and, of course, the membership to come along with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Well, I appreciate the comments by everybody and Belinda and myself. It's an interesting process, and we'll commit to working with you to see it through. I wanted to ask the other assembly members if they have questions that we could help answer.
Mr. Dunbar, did you want to jump in?
Wait, before that.
Sorry, what was that?
Hold on, Forrest. So, from a management process, I think the best thing to do maybe is to send a text to Meg, and she will make sure everyone who wants to be heard gets referred over to Tom and Belinda. So, Ms. Altel.
Forrest, you had a question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions. Thank you for this. I read through the handout. It's essentially like a PowerPoint, and some of the location studies in the other documents. I haven't looked through all of it, so perhaps it's in there. I just haven't seen it. But two questions. First is, you mentioned that housing is a part of this, and I'm wondering if the group contemplated or has heard philanthropy contemplating purchasing transitional housing or other housing units, particularly small hotels, that kind of thing that we discussed last year. It's not one of the 5 main locations, but I'm wondering if that also has been part of the discussion. And then my second question is, what I don't see on here, and again, I apologize if it's on here, I'm just missing, is the question of timing. That is to say, I think a number of my neighbors are very worried that if you say, well, we're going to use a combination of these sites, but then you go forward with the Tudor Elmore site first, and it's a large, scalable site, that they are worried that the other sites won't come online, and that site will continue to grow. Conversely, if you were to take some of the pressure off that site by opening the other sites first, the medically fragile, the other special populations in other places, then I think the neighborhood would be more accepting once eventually that, that larger site or that proposed site went into Tudor Elmore. So I'm curious about the sort of sequencing of the different sites.
So thank you for the question. So the short answer to your first question about the permanent supportive housing, that's always part of the strategy. We have surfaced this concept with the private sector, the philanthropy group, briefed them, but it's a discussion process. They're already doing a lot in the community, but this solution, an integrated system approach in Anchorage will only work if that element of the community, those public-private partnerships, the philanthropic efforts, of which there have been a lot, quite frankly, so far, is part of this. And again, it's all integrated. And that kind of goes to your second question, Forrest, and that is, our assumption is that these will move forward in parallel, right? That these efforts will go in parallel. That doesn't mean they will all land at exactly the same time. So I'm just going to speculate. How long it would take to renovate, say, a facility at the Alaska Club for medically fragile, and how long it would take to get up a tension steel structure, for example, down at Elmore. I think those processes can go forward together. There are other things that can go forward together. Permanent supportive housing is a big one that can go forward and relatively quickly, we think. But our assumption, and it takes more work, is that they will generally move in parallel. They may have different timing on when particular pieces come into play. And we were careful to use the word drawdown. We think as these different elements come into play, some can come fairly quickly, that we would be able to start drawing down the Sullivan. But it will not be a necessarily rigid timeline for outcome. Linda, any thoughts there?
I saw Chris maybe wanted to respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Forrest. One of the answers to that question is, as we draft the resolution to bring forward this framework, this strategy, it will have within it essential kind of landmarks, milestones, in which each of the processes going forward are based. And so we are cognizant of that concern, have discussed that concern, and in our discussions we said we would address that concern in the document that comes forward as proposed legislation.
Thanks, Chris, for helping. Other questions?
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions. So just in terms of process, I can start with a few and then pass it on, and we can come back. The first one is just some of the infrastructure pieces that I think all would agree need to be in place for this to be successful, and just A, transportation, B, outreach, sort of that infrastructure of actually being able to go out and contact people and work with them, and then C, data, that sort of infrastructure of a system where we actually can share information, have that I don't see that in here, and I question the effectiveness of these different campuses and this network system without a thoughtful approach to how to move people around, how to reach out and have relationships with all of these folks, and then how to manage all of that information, share it. So maybe someone from the group can address that, and that's one of many questions. So again, you can come back to me.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind starting on that question and then invite Dr. Morris to follow up with the administration. So we have talked about those three pieces extensively in our conversations. This is about a system that overlays with a lot of existing efforts already in place. Outreach being one. We have talked about transportation. If you have a no wrong door entry, you have to get people to land in the right location. So in the RFI, of course, we are asking for properties that are near transportation routes, but we've also talked about how to overlay specific transportation services into this. This is not necessarily get into the weeds of the operations of these facilities, but we have talked about these in broad strokes. Data continues to be something we are better at than we were, but continues to have some challenges, particularly as we stood up mass care and getting all of that accurate data in the system. We are, I believe, committed to cleaning up that data so that as we proceed with investments, we proceed on the best data that we have. So I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions or turn it over to the administration on those 3 points.
Thank you, Assembly Members Alatel. You're exactly right. As we discussed back in June, outreach, engagement, transportation, so that folks don't get lost to follow up, so that we can truly have a no wrong door approach and an ability to get folks to the facility that's best suited for them, and then once at a facility, help them get to treatment, job interviews, all of the different things that folks that might need. Transportation is critical, and data, as Ms. Alatel said, we're better, and we're still working both at the state level and here locally. On the front page of the paper today, there's an article that lists that 74 Alaskans died in our streets and in our woods over the past 4 years. We've actually lost a lot more than that. The ones that met the criteria for that report are the ones that died alone. And I don't think we need any more information than that, than to know that we need to be investing in outreach and going out and letting people know that there is a safer, better place or places in our city.
I would just add that if you look at slide number 3, which has the boxes of the different kind of sub areas that we've been discussing, each of the congregate sites that we've discussed has layered into it this bullet of navigation centered design. And in the housing units, it's slightly different. Substance use treatment services has a different mode and model. And the permanent supportive housing units, they do have forms of outreach that are key to make sure we're not just warehousing folks. But there's an underlying principle across all of our conversations that each of these facilities will partake in, be part of a coordinated navigation system. And so we have yet to dive so deeply into the operational side of the equation to be able to clearly demonstrate how that works. But from a principle perspective, we are unanimously aligned that that is a critical aspect to how we implement these services in this array. And so I would just point to that one bullet in each of those boxes that demonstrates loud and clear as we can, that that's a priority, not just an afterthought.
Thank you. And maybe just one more quick, I think that this is one shorter. The other question was around that there seemed to be, initially when the administration first came in, and also from a fair number of the people who came in testified, the primary concern around visible homelessness, around the people that you see on the streets. And so I guess my question is, and connected to that is our sort of attempt at some point to look at a place for people to be during the day. Maybe you could address that about where this fits into resources and locations that are available during the day and not solely at night, and also if there is a specific strategy built into this to address what one might call visible homelessness?
Again, I'll take a first stab, invite my colleagues to layer on and the administration. So the navigation center concept is a lot what we've talked about, day and night services in a single location. We also have our partners simultaneously bringing on the Third Avenue Navigation Center down at the old Beans Cafe. I think this is the new way in which we approach homeless response services in Anchorage. I think our lesson has been learned, and some of the success has been piloted as we have moved through mass care and other opportunities. As for visible homelessness, one of the hopes with this approach is that you get the kind of care and place that best meets your needs. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We had the expertise of the coalition to work through some population breakdowns, and we know that we need a place for couples to go. We need specific opportunities for LGBTQIA plus individuals to go. And so by creating and fostering environments that are welcoming to those individuals, we hope to see the opportunity taken advantage of more. Partly, some of it is from a public perception and even from a client perception, and with some good reason, it's a reputational problem. We hope that with careful design, we can overcome any reputational problem to really get at that issue.
I just would add, again, I hate to be hieroglyphic here, but in the navigation center design concept, I don't think we contemplated any place not being 24 hours, where folks, when they're brought to a place, will have an opportunity for taking care of their needs day and night. And so the 24-hour piece, I would suggest, is baked into the concept of no wrong door, and we're going to make sure no impacts on neighborhoods or as few impacts as possible. And all of those things together really drive to the 24-hour services available. And to the point of visible homelessness, I had actually asked that we consider adding another box here, and it's not there, and I understand, there's only so much space and time, but we do have a population of individuals that are camping out or not coming in, and we don't yet have kind of a strategy worked out for them. We're working on the folks who we can effectively move into a place that they want to be at and that can meet their needs, and that conversation about those visible street folks who may or may not be movable is on the table but not yet resolved in terms of how we're going to move forward. So what you see here is for probably 90% of the rest of those folks, maybe more, and the idea is, again, no wrong door. When you get to the place that fits your needs, you're able to stay there and take care of and learn some skills and move into housing units that we're making available to help people in that progression towards independence as best as they're capable.
Briefly, yes. Every facility complicated is 24/7, no more. Try to move as far away as we can from just night shelters. I'd also like to add that we're personally, I spend a lot more time thinking about invisible homelessness and how to engage with that, meaning folks like were reported in the paper, but also folks that are in the bubble, that are couch surfing, staying in places that in their cars and so forth. And find ways to divert those folks from shelter and get them back to housing and whatever help they need.
Mr. Perez-Verdia, I don't have anyone else in the queue, so if you would like to go ahead, you are welcome to.
Thank you. So I think that this was addressed briefly in the comments, but I'm questioning the the costs, both the capital costs and the operating costs, and that may be something we're getting to later, but just right off the bat, this seems we've gone from this municipality historically contributing, honestly, very little to the work of homelessness over the course of decades, and we have stepped into this work more so now than we have, at least in my lifetime, and I'm curious about the sort of plans, but also the will of this assembly and this administration, and whether the intention is that the city will continue to bring more to this table, or whether there are actual plans to build the kind of partnerships that are necessary to fund this in a sustainable way. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about the money part of it, both the costs of building and renovating and establishing these centers, but also the ongoing costs of maintaining them, as well as the infrastructure. We talked a little bit about the outreach and the data and all of that. So if someone can talk a little bit about what the plans are in terms of money, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Well, let's take this in two parts. First, the capital funding. We have identified not an insubstantial amount of funds available currently for capital construction for these needs, but I think I'm going to put them on the spot. They might be on the agenda later. But I would like to hear from the funders what their thoughts are. If we come to an alignment, are we still in a partnership with you? And so I'd love to briefly have comments from either of the funders that are here that would like to speak to that. And if you don't, that's okay. I feel like I'm putting you on the spot. Yeah. Either one of you. Or both.
Good morning, Greg Savano.
There's a yellow button.
Yes.
There it is.
Good morning, Greg Savano with Widener Apartment Homes. And yes, we were briefed on the contents of this draft and had an opportunity to review this. And I think broadly speaking, and I'll just speak for Widener as one of the four funders that have been meeting over the course of the last couple of years, that we like the framework that we see. We like the collaboration that has come as a result of this facilitated process and are encouraged by that. And we've looked at different ways for us to take the money that we've pledged and find a way to help out in this solution, find a solution to this problem. So broadly speaking, what's been presented here is something that is encouraging for us. I left myself a lot of outs there, but you understand that as the details get firmed up later on, this process that has went through, the facilitation that's gone through with the help of our facilitators is very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Brown, a Senior Fellow on Matters of Homelessness at the Rasmussen Foundation, and just like Greg said, we are very heartened by this progress, and this is what we have been waiting for, is the integrated system approach that will leverage and braid funding and truly be a partnership that goes forward. We are generally better able to fund capital, so we would certainly see this as a foundation to make investments upon, and hope that the municipality will consider the operational side of this in the long run. So we are definitely seeing this as a major step that will help inform our investment decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And so that's on the capital stack. We have funding in the budget, and our philanthropy partners, seeing some gold in the bottom of the gold pan, are seeing an opportunity to make an investment if, of course, we continue in our alignment and the Assembly approves the plan and we start to make real progress. So then we turn to the question of operating funds. And there's a list of potential operating funds that are listed on slide 9. And so there's that column, but I think that Meg if you don't mind, I put you slightly on the spot. What I would love to hear you briefly share with folks is how by dividing these populations into affinity areas, we might better be able to fund them.
Sure, thank you. So first, this is a time where the municipality has the opportunity to take advantage of some funding related to COVID-19 that can really jumpstart the operations of specific types of facilities. Also, as we look to provide particular types of services, what we haven't done in the past very well, although I would say Brother Francis Shelter is leading the way, is leverage other safety net services and funding sources to meet the needs of clients, which defray the overall operating costs. Whether that's Medicaid is really the big one. If we can provide Medicaid billable services, it's not a one-for-one, but it's a significant opportunity. Similarly, right now, the municipality has funds to help individuals get from what we like to say shelter or unsheltered to lease. So there's the opportunity to take advantage of leasing opportunities of non-congregate facilities to provide homes for people. This is amazing, and it moves in the right direction, and we will continue to see more investments coming towards transitional and workforce and permanent supportive housing. So the operating dollars are there. I have a habit of getting really far in the weeds, so I'm not going to do that, but I'm happy to work toward producing something, of course, with our subject matter experts that can really help allay some of these operating concerns. I think, though, the opportunity is here to braid a variety of funding streams, which in fact will not only defray costs, but improve the services and outcomes for the clients, which I'm really excited about. Is there anything else on operating dollars? Okay, please.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what I said before. It might make more sense now. Because of the complexity of the capital array and coming up with sites and looking at numbers of people, we wrestled through a timeline, the first questions, what are we trying to resolve? We wrestled through how many people are we actually talking about in need, right? We've wrestled through coming up to this point in preliminary alignment, and we have a draft set of numbers, but they're not specific to sites, and therefore they would be more distracting than they would be helpful to the conversation right now. And so I would just offer that I think the next part of the facilitated process is once we come to, we're resolving towards these buildings, then we set up specific budgets for operations and identify how they'll be paid for through that next phase of the process. And so we just frankly, in the 500 or so hours we wrestled on these topics, have yet to be able to cross that bridge, but it's coming.
I have Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Quinn Davidson in the queue. Would you like me to put you back in the queue, Mr. Perez-Verdea?
No, thank you. It's fine.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, let me say thank you to everyone who worked so hard on this. I will say I had my doubts. I think I actually said that once already publicly. But I know that there was a lot of frustration, and I'm sure that some of the conversations were actually brutal, but I want to commend you all for sticking with it. And that's the tough part, you know. And so I'm really happy to see what has come forward out of those conversations. I will say that to a certain extent, I'm not surprised there wasn't really anything new or earth-shattering out of any of this, so maybe that's a good thing. But the fact that we can actually look at it on paper, maybe that's really helpful. And so that we now have all the thoughts kind of in black and white where we can really look at where everybody's thoughts are going. It's not so disjointed. It's not a lot of ideas and concepts floating out there, but it's something that really has some tangibility to it. So I'm really thankful and appreciative, to be able to see that we're at this point now. So thank you all very much. I was particularly thankful that there were a certain number of things that were recognized in these conversations. That was the idea of being able to handle that unexpected surge not knowing sometimes where numbers can just out of the blue bloom into something that we maybe weren't really ready to handle, and it looks like that's really taken into consideration here. So I appreciate that, and certainly just that idea of having so many different special populations. But that kind of leads me to my question. It looks like you have specifically identified certain numbers within those special populations where this group would go here and that group would go there. And so my question is really about flexibility. So in other words, if we suddenly see a population that kind of goes above the number that we would typically think would be its maximum number, can we move them around to these facilities? So in other words, how flexible would the concept be in how these facilities are actually used? Say, for example, we all of a sudden have just an inordinate amount of medically fragile people. Would we be, if we can't serve them in this one particular facility, what's plan B for that group? So anyway, can anybody speak to just kind of the potential flexibility in any of these facilities? Thank you. Then I have another question after that. Thank you.
So I think this system is designed to work in concert with itself. And what I think we need to also acknowledge is beds don't equal the static number of clients served. And so we did place the client served data into the boxes as well, because the stay at each bed seems to be fluid throughout a month or a year. So the most static may be something like the medical convalescence, where it may take 6 months to a year to get that approval for a personal care attendant or a Medicaid waiver or something like that. That said, what is at the heart of this entire problem statement that the facilitators helped us with is we are talking primarily about single adult homelessness. So there is a commonality throughout the entire approach. I also think that building in housing units, what we need to remember is we will be permanently, hopefully, with very low returns to the system, individuals out. So while we talk about a number that we currently serve within the system, I think it's important that that presumes no exits. And we've provided some exit ramps as well. So we've got flexibility and exit ramps, so I think it can flex within the system, but it is an ongoing conversation we have when we talk about data and not having that data quite as refined as we'd like. We're cognizant of that, and so it's an ongoing conversation. We were tasked with trying to get out of the Sullivan arena, and so if you look at that slide on page 8, you know, we match the mass care capacity. We match the mass care capacity with some exit ramps. So I think that's important to point out. And then we do have that surge capacity. Dr. Morris, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just a little bit. Numbers are needing to be refined still. We'll continue to do this as we get better data. And I share what Meg said, that we understand that the data is not perfect, but even if the data was perfect, we're dealing with human beings, and there's the unexpected. And so our designs are all centered around the idea of making sure that we have as many as we think, plus some for everyone. It will not be an acceptable solution if we leave folks outside.
And I will add one last element to that, is we still have the Title 16 provisions that allow for the health department director to make a designation, and if we find ourselves in a position where there is an extraordinary volume of individuals for some specific reason, we can create, working with private partners, churches and other entities, locations for, or new buildings for ramped up services in a crisis. And so we have all of these elements we're talking about, plus we have the department director's ability to flex the services as needed. And a note passed to me from Ms. Alatel, establish system capacity that may shift as resources come online. That's the whole idea, is we're building a system as flexible as we can.
would add to that a little bit. I appreciate that. I mean, we are kind of in a situation where we saw with COVID a big increase in people homeless, and largely because the established shelters cut their occupancy. Well, they'll ramp back up once we finally get out of the critical stage of COVID, hopefully soon. We also, with part of this, if we set up a site for medically fragile, then those that are at Brother Francis now can go there, and that frees up, provides about 90 more spaces for more general population. That right now, Brother Francis is, I think, at 60 or something like that, and that's the most they can do for medically fragile, but they could be up to 150 for, if they go back kind of what they were doing before. So that gives us a lot of them.
And just so you know, I would wrestle with that number 150, which is why we're not quite there with all of these numbers, right? So it's important to note that, as Mr. Moore said, we're still looking at the numbers.
Well, thank you. I mean, that helps. And I recognize the fact that I think the flexibility, I guess, is kind of built in. And data is always good today, but tomorrow could be totally different. So, and I think everybody recognizes that. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to just get to a place where we were trying to limit things or make them so specialized or specific that we couldn't adapt or adjust accordingly. But it sounds like that's really the intent, is to make sure that we just do whatever needs to be done in order to fill the need. So I appreciate that. So I do have one other question in terms of funding, and I might have gotten my answer, so I don't know if anybody from the team wants to comment on this, but I was just curious about kind of the idea of prioritizing. I mean, I appreciate the fact that there are several funding sources listed here, but I also recognize that some of those funding sources could change just depending on what happens to the federal budget or to a nonprofit's budget, or that those are always kind of, they're a little bit of an unknown into the future. So I just wondered if there was any effort made when you looked at this whole approach as a system, if there was any thought to what really had to be prioritized, what comes first before something else. And so anyway, if there's anybody that could comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
So thank you for the question. And one of the things I was remiss to say when we talked about funding previously is the funding we are talking about, particularly for operations, is not meant to defund any of our established operations. So let's start with that. And I think that's very important. As we look at prioritization, some things are just going to potentially be ready to go faster, or we may have timelines on particular types of funds. So for example, the emergency rental assistance is already sitting in an account in the municipality that can do these shelter to lease arrangements. So if we can find a facility, a non-congregate facility, to stand up as workforce housing, and we can do that quickly, it makes sense to utilize those funds now because the need is already there. And so things will move in parallel, keeping in mind that particularly with the operating dollars, I think this body, as it moves through its next budget process, will have to have a conversation about where its investments are going to go, but knowing that we already make investments in a lot of these areas. Some of those projects are ongoing, and some of those projects have been put on hold due to COVID. So in a lot of ways, we've already identified some of our priorities in the existing budget, and the question is, do we want to shift any of those, particularly as to operating dollars? And I know Mr. Constant has something to add.
Yep. So one area of very broad alignment is that housing has to be part of this strategy. And there are discussions about potentially setting up one or two more former hotels that can be converted into housing units. And so I think a very broadly shared priority is let's get those housing units up as quickly as we can, because if we can take 100 or 150 or 200 people out of the mass care directly into housing with supports, then that's a win. At the same time, because there's a capital lead time on construction of any site, that is also a priority to get through that process. And so the metaphor I used in our meeting yesterday was you think of a symphony, you hear kind of the conductor, there's the oboes tuning up, then you have the drums tuning up, and then all of a sudden, all at once, it all starts to rise together into symphony. The reality is that we have to deal with it all at once, and so we will have a timeline, we will have an approach, and it will deal with housing, it will deal with shelter, it will deal with planning and permitting all as a whole.
I hate to come in as the chorus, and I really hate to follow that analogy, but you know, they say when you've got three partners and they all agree, then two of them are unnecessary. But we do agree, and it's important to call that out. We need to. We're absolutely in agreement that we're going to move forward together in parallel on these integrated issues: housing, shelter, navigation, outreach. All of these things need to be done. And asking about the priority, it's a very reasonable question, but it also it feels a bit like asking, do you need food more or water more? And we need them both. And yes, some of these are going to have longer lead times than others, but we're going to move forward with them in parallel and get them all done. I will say that it's my hope that this is the last time that we spend CapEx on navigation with shelter function. I'd like to have that. We haven't gotten into that conversation, but I'd like to be on the record as I'd like to get that out of the way and be done and never come back again and want or need to do more of that type of expenditure.
I have Ms. Quinn Davidson in the queue next.
Thank you, Mr. Hotel, and thanks to everyone for being there. I guess just wanted to start off by thanking Ms. Hotel for pulling this together. I think probably Mr. Constant, Mr. Littleton as well, but I know that Meg really championed this facilitated process, and there's a lot of pushback from the administration at the beginning, and I just want to say thank you to her and to the others who kept pushing for it, because it sounds like it's been really fruitful. And I mean, it's a little hard. I really want to be positive about this, and I do feel positive about it. At the same time, we released a plan very similar to this in May. These have been the discussions for a long time, and so it's hard to have waited for months and have folks still in the Sullivan and not have had a plan for months. But I understand we're moving in the right direction, and I'm glad that people are all on board now, and that does make me feel really good, and I'm thankful to the administration for being willing to come around and engage in this process. My question is mostly about communications with the public, and I know that Cameron was asking some communications questions, so I hope I didn't miss it. But how do we bring the public along? Because I don't think the public's aware of all this work that's being done, and also of this, plan and sort of milestones you all are making. And even when I go to community councils, and they're pretty engaged, they're not really aware of where we are. So how can we up that communications effort? And again, just thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. On the next steps and timeline, we do a little bit of a sketch of that plan. And one of the next steps for us is to introduce a resolution on the 13th and set it for public hearing on the 27th. In the intervening time, it is our intention to make sure that resolution gets widely distributed to community councils. It'll, of course, be public record. And then be available to speak with community councils. There will be communication talking points from the group coming out in relation to the resolution. We're working on a comms plan. We also intend to speak with the Homelessness Leadership Council, the Houseless Resource Advisory Council, the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness Board and Advisory Council, and hold a town hall. And I realize that's a lot of communication in a 2-week period, but what we really want to do is to use that compressed timeline to receive the feedback so that we can take it into then the public hearing and make refinements if refinements are called for. And really, this is a community approach. We want the community's feedback and we want to open those opportunities to do so. If members have additional ideas or things that would be helpful, please share them because we really want to be in service to you all to get this widely known and answer the questions the community may have. And I just want to make sure I stated it right. The public hearing for the resolution would be on the 27th, which is a Wednesday assembly meeting. And I would invite the administration and anyone else to weigh in.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson's comments covered a fair bit of ground. I'll say first, I think that every one of us can find things that we would rather we did differently yesterday. Yesterday's not the important today. Today's important. Tomorrow is what matters. It's what we're planning for our community. As far as the communication goes, Ms. Zalatel laid it out very well. But I'd like to highlight that we're doing this communication work in partnership. Mr. Welton and I, for instance, are meeting with some key stakeholders here on Thursday, going out as partners to talk to folks together. And that's the messaging strategy, I believe, going forward, that we'll be doing it together.
May I follow up briefly, Ms. Zalatel?
Yes, of course, please.
Thank you. I just want to thank Dr. Marsh for that comment and also for your humility in this process. And you made a comment earlier about, this is a better plan than what we first started looking at in July, August. And I just really appreciate that. I think it's an unusual quality in politics, and it's about getting to what's best for the people we're serving, rather than adhering to things, we think are the best at the beginning. So I just want to say a sincere thank you to you for your comments and adaptability.
Thank you.
I will add one note. I think one of the great things to come of this process, and again, we're still sorting the details, is I think now we are looking at an array of services that really does capture the breadth of individuals that we've been trying to figure out. No, in this model as it stands, and until we find another set of individuals we've overlooked, I think we have here addressed the entirety of the question, other than, of course, the campers and what the plan is there. So it's an evolution even from what we had before, but it certainly is deeply based on what the coalition and the community's been demanding for a very long time.
Ms. Kennedy, did you have another question?
Yes, actually, a comment first and then a question. I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone's motivation in this process, but I do believe that everyone was absolutely focused on what was best for the people that need these kinds of services. And so I'm glad we've gotten to this point, and I will say that I know confrontation is difficult. I know it doesn't necessarily feel good, but it's nothing to shy away from. And the people who were in part of this negotiation process didn't shy away from any of it. So, again, I just want to commend you for that hard work. That was the hard work, was basically trying to get to a place where there was a meeting of the minds. But y'all did it, and we're here now, so I'm really grateful for that. But my question is, and I don't know if anybody wants to answer this because maybe I'm opening up a can of worms that doesn't necessarily need to be, but what are the potential roadblocks right now? We talked a little bit about funding. What are we kind of worried about in terms of this not being able to come together at this point? So anyway, I'll just kind of leave it. It's not necessarily directed at anyone in particular, but if there are some thoughts about what the real challenge is yet, I'd like to hear. Thank you.
So I would offer that Mr. Dunbar asked a question at the beginning that to me highlights the biggest risk. And that is if not that it's a reality, but the fear that we approve something and then the administration on their part implements the part that they want and not the other parts. Right? That's a real and honest fear that people have expressed. But we have made a commitment to work through that in a way that we address in timing and organization and plans that will mitigate that fear, hopefully for members of the body so they can vote to support it. I think that the other factor that continues to press on the outside of this work is that with COVID and with economic issues that are related to where our economy is right now, there could be a massive surge, right? That all of this work could be for not in a way because the wave could break and we could have twice as many people and find ourselves in a position where the community is still saying, look, you haven't done anything to deal with homelessness, even though we've done this incredible thing. And so to me, those are some of the concerns, but most of it can be alleviated or has been by the wrestling and the hard work in the room and then realization that, oh my God, we're actually really close in what we want, right? That there was kind of a quiet aha moment in the room. So I think that's how we get through it, is we continue to do this work layer by layer until we have landed.
Ms. Kennedy, thanks for bringing that out on the table. I always appreciate when you just get things moving forward. On our first day of working together, Admiral Barrett and Belinda, made a very strong point that this won't work unless you lay everything out on the table and get to talking about it. And if you keep it to yourself, you can't fix it. And once you toss it on the table, we can fix it. So, and you're not the first person to brought this up. Mr. Perez-Rodilla brought it up a bit more obliquely earlier about talking about willingness, and we answered him instead about funding. Let me speak first to him. He asked, does the community have the willingness to engage on this, and does the administration have the my understanding of it was, does the administration have the willingness to partner with folks who perhaps wouldn't necessarily be obvious partners, shall we say? And the answer, in my mind, is a resounding yes. We're absolutely willing to work with folks to get this done. The administration campaigned on certainly not the number one issue, the number two issue of homelessness in Anchorage, and it's very important to our boss. And it's important to the entirety of the administration. Mr. Constant brought up the issue about, is the administration going to execute the parts that we want to do and to the detriment of what the Assembly wants to do? I want to tell you, we're not going to agree to do anything we don't want to do. We want to do all the stuff that's on this agreement. If we didn't want to do it, it would be because we believe it would be bad for the city. If we think it's going to be bad for the city, we're not going to want to do it. We think all of the components on this plan are good. There isn't some part that we secretly don't think we need to do. We think it's all things that we need to do. And so that really won't be an issue, but it's certainly an understandable concern. For us, I think that the most obvious, there are many, many barriers to get something like this done. I think the next one on the list is communicating with the broader Assembly, because we've done a non-traditional process for the city. Because of the Open Meetings Act and various other reasons, we haven't been able to have everyone in the room. And so navigating that with you, I think, is the next step. And then there'll be other next things after that. To be frank, from the beginning of this process, I've been much more concerned with how we staff whatever facilities we stood up rather than building them. I think building them, relatively speaking, is easy. Running them is the more challenging part.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'll just say, as we were finding alignment, Mr. Barrett told us repeatedly, next comes the hard part. It's the implementation. But what I think our ask is of the community and the members is to get behind the exit strategy as we continue to flesh out the details for the implementation I know there are words on this presentation that will cause members of the community pause. I know that that is very real, and very real for my constituents. That said, we are still moving through. This is an exit strategy, and we will refine the implementation. We have the RFI going out, the request for information, and I wouldn't put myself behind a plan I didn't believe in. Again, the devil is in the details. My colleague is not here to say that for me at the moment, but that is true. But if we can agree on the framework as a community, as an exit strategy, then we can work through the next parts. The open communication, I think, is really key. So you all have never been shy in letting us know how you think or what you think about things. Please let us know so we can address the concerns. Same for members. It is an invitation, and we will figure out the most appropriate vehicle to do that with the Open Meetings Act. But this is an invitation to please engage with us to provide your feedback, because we are hoping to do this on a fairly compressed timeline because we still feel the urgency of demobilizing and exiting out of the Sullivan Arena and the time that is ticking in which mass care will ultimately have to close. So I wanted to close on that comment for myself. Mr. Constant has a comment, and then we're going to turn it back over to the facilitators.
Thank you. And I mentioned this yesterday in our small group. Governing is hard. Governing in a pandemic is really, really, really hard. And trying to establish trusting relationships with people who you wouldn't necessarily socialize with or relate to in a number of ways is also hard. And as you saw the way this conversation began in the first 2 weeks of July, and third week and fourth week, it didn't start out easy. It was a fight. And now we have managed to work through that to a functioning process. And to me, that is a hallmark of what is possible across many domains in our municipality at this time. And I would just simply say that in my estimation, this relationship that's working forward now is the healthiest example of our two bodies of government working together. Think of where it started. Hopefully that is a benchmark for where we're going for a number of other items and another number of other concerns. So ultimately, what I would suggest is this whole conversation should provide you with some hope. Thank you.
I have a question, Meg, and others. I know there's some folks in the room, given your protocols. We have another 20 minutes or so here. If people would like to make comments for a couple of minutes, we're certainly interested in feedback if the folks here want to offer some input to us. So I don't know how you manage that, but we're certainly open to it.
That looks agreeable to everyone. So please, if you'd like to provide us some feedback and comments, I think we'll use our typical structure of 3 minutes, if that sounds fair. And so we can hear from anyone who wants to speak with us. And then if we have extra time, we can go from there, or we can give you your time back. Please come forward if you'd like to provide us some feedback. Just state your name so we get it on the recording for the meeting, and then if the microphone's on, and if you think it would be helpful, provide what area of town you're in, if that you believe is helpful to our consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Paul Stang. I'm president of the University Area Community Council. I listened as closely as I can hear what you said today. And let me take off my mask for this speaking. It's a little clear. One of the problems I had was hearing what a lot of you had to say. And, thanks, Chris, for asking people to speak up. The Coalition to End Homelessness, the Catholic Social Services, Brother Francis, and Rasmussen Cook and Housing all have a stake and are big players in this issue of homelessness. And the general impression, actually almost universal impression I get from them, often quotes out of the newspaper, are smaller is better. And that's a theme that we included in their letter on July 8th about this topic. When I looked through this, it looked like we're moving away from the one-size-fits-all, which is where we were in July. And your item C seems to imply it's focused on the clients. And the drift of the conversation, various people saying various things, seem to indicate that we would be going into smaller facilities. But then you get to page 6, and the focus is on what can replace the Sullivan Arena lock, stock, and barrel. And I say, whoa, why is that now in this stage a concern, that we want individual facilities that can replace? So there's a kind of cross current that comes out of this, and somewhat in the conversation we've had. As far as public input, a couple of you have mentioned how important that is, and we certainly agree. And I can tell you, just from our experience, that it's like somebody set the residents of our community council on fire. All of a sudden, people sprung up back in July with a lot to say, and we passed on some of that. So I can imagine that when you have discussions with various community councils, you will hear clearly people tend not to be hesitant to speak up. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm really pleased that you've gotten as far this quickly, and we thank you for that. But I didn't find exactly clear where we're going, and I didn't quite get this one in the title, Exit Strategy from the Sullivan, and then long-term intervention. And it's unclear to me whether this is a kind of a moving phenomena out of the Sullivan into the final solution for what we're trying to do on homelessness here, what we're trying to do on what buildings will be built, how they will be functioning, what services they will provide, how all the networks together. Or is there something yet a longer term pattern? So it's a little unclear as to what's going on there. And I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I'm sure we'll continue to be in communication. Please come forward. Can you just make sure you're close to the mic? Thanks.
I'm excited about this plan. I support this. I would support any piece of this plan in my backyard. I hope the rest of the community does also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Roger Branson. I'm a longtime advocate for consumers of mental health services, and lots of our folks are caught up not just in homelessness, but also in corrections. And I've been watching the process, and I just got to say how appreciative I am of all the effort that's gone in from all the folks coming to the table, and the work that's gone to get it to this far. I see great things coming from this sort of community, and I look forward to engaged in the process as much as I can with my local council and others. So thank you for all your hard work.
Roger, if you don't mind me asking you a question, and if no one else minds me asking Roger a question, it's our intention to come and visit the Houseless Resource Advisory Council to talk with individuals experiencing homelessness or those with lived experience about this plan. Is there any other outreach we should be thinking about doing that we may have missed?
Certainly with the coalition, but you know, just to the individuals themselves within the different shelters, and I think the shelter operators are all well receptive to helping getting those lived experience voices through, and so, yeah.
Great, thanks for that feedback, I appreciate it. Would anyone else like to come forward and comment and provide us feedback?
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Doug Tollerud from the Salvation Army. It's a privilege to be back in Anchorage after being gone for 10 years. I plan on retiring up here. I have children that are up here. But I just was with the Salvation Army in Los Angeles for the last 6 years, where we have 14 homeless hotels and have over 10,000 people that are in our care. Coming back to Alaska, after leaving in 2011, I noticed that the Salvation Army has 225 beds less than when I left in 2011. We want to help you rectify that, and we would like to get our facilities back up and running, and we want to do everything we can do to support our fellow Anchorage community to put people in beds, in treatment, and put their lives back in order. So anyway, I'm happy to be back after being gone for 10 years.
So I have a question, Lieutenant Colonel Tollerud. So in your LA experience, did you have any of those buildings that were set up as residences with outpatient substance use treatment services on site?
They were all entry level to where they were able to be referred to treatment programs.
So one of the challenges we face is some of the funding we have must be used to provide substance use disorder treatment. And so I know in LA there's the Shields model of services in which they provide outpatient residences with, private residences with outpatient services available. So it would be great if you could look within your system to see if anyone is doing something similar.
Yeah, we just dedicated a 25-unit little house system in Harbor City, where 5 of them have been set aside for students at the Harbor Community College. So the Army has a lot of track records depending on what city we are. Again, we used to have a few more here. We used to run the detox. Most of our funding, when we were here before, was state funding. It totaled $20 million when I was here before. It's down to $8 million now. We got very little. I appreciate the city recognizing when we were here. We got very little from the city for funding for the services we provided for over 425 beds. So in that, I'm back. We're looking at it. We're seeing what opportunities are there, and we want to make a difference. And we love the help of the city council.
Don't go yet.
Oh, can you please come back, Lieutenant Colonel? Mr. Weddleton has a question for you, it looks like.
You know, a few, so welcome. We talk a lot about you, but we don't really talk with you so much in your group. But so you said you have 225 fewer beds than you did when?
Well, the ARP was 68 beds when we were here, and that is a 6-month residential treatment program funded by our thrift stores. And if you remember, you had an earthquake, and it disabled 3 of our thrift stores to the point of they're no longer existing, so we have to rebuild those as well. So we're looking at a couple of locations too, because that's what generated the resources. The other was Eagle Crest, which is across from the Anchorage Cemetery. We sold that property, and that was another 93 beds at one time, and it's transitional housing, which dealt a lot with those who were medically challenged and mentally challenged in a care facility. They had a curfew when they come in and when they went out. But we managed that very, very well for over 30 years. But due to whatever the circumstances, I was not here, we sold that facility and closed that program, and that was transitional housing. So in reality, we are looking for those opportunities again at different locations. So.
Okay, well, that's great, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Zach Sears. I've been a member of the community for about 5 years now, doing mostly outreach, and recently that's changed a little bit. This is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Doing rapid rehousing, outreach in camps, and excuse me, in street corners. Sometimes it felt like a little bit of a shell game. This is an actual plan. This is something I am excited for not only the community, but for those people here. And I really want to just give you my thanks and my appreciation. I look forward to helping in any way I can.
All right, anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone come forward. I'm going to turn it back over to our facilitators to wrap us up.
And thank you. Our last item, it is a lot around communication, and you've had some discussion on that, and also the kind of next step. And we tried to lay out what we're aware of on page 10 of the slide deck that we gave you. And what I would encourage folks, both on the assembly and elsewhere, if there are other things that we need to fill in on that, or add to it, or approach a little differently, I think the feedback would be very welcome. I think, you've heard it in the room a couple of times, and I think it was John Morrison said, and Assemblyman Kennedy there. One of the guidelines we had is get the issue on the table, and we'll work through it. And I think that's been very encouraging, not always easy, but I commend the players both from the administration and the Assembly. The mayor was in with us the other day, committed to this, and we think it works. But there's a lot of work still to do. It's, if you paraphrase, a famous person, it's not the beginning of the end here, but hopefully, perhaps, it's the end of the beginning, and we can move forward together with a broad view and with a lot of partners to make our community and the residents, all of the residents who live here, a better place for all of us. So Linda and I thank you for the opportunity to participate. Linda, any other comment?
Yes, if I could, first I want to just thank everybody for coming in today and sharing your feedback. I think we had some really good Q&A and good feedback and suggestions. I just want to respond. Several people said that they were really pleased with, and in some cases surprised by, the fact that we made the progress that we had. And so I want to just share, as one of the facilitators, the three key things that I think we did as a group that set the stage for us being where we are today. And I think these are things that could be translated into other areas of conflict. The first was the obvious one when you brought us in, was to bring a decision-making methodology, and that decision quality methodology. Just agreeing to go through a structured approach to resolving a conflict, to making a decision, makes a phenomenal difference. The second thing that I think was powerful for this group is on day one, what we started with was finding out from the group where the higher ground was and where they had common ground, rather than starting from where we had disagreements. We started from common ground and we looked for what's really on your heart, what are you really trying to accomplish? And I think that really grounded the group to start to work together. The third thing that we did on day one are the enablers of a collaborative decision process, which we print at the bottom of our agenda every time we meet. Those were agreed to by the group on day one as the terms of engagement for how we would treat each other. And I think those were also particularly important. So as you're dealing in our community, as we are always going to have differences of opinions and things that can become what seem to be entrenched conflicts, I would just suggest thinking about these three techniques that in this case I think really supported some successful work together. So thank you.
I have Member LaFrance in the queue. Please, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And really, I just wanted to reiterate my gratitude to the members and to of the Assembly and the administration and the facilitators who have been part of this process. As someone who's been on the body for a little bit over 4 years, it's also really exciting to see the evolution in this area and how I believe that even the community's understanding of issues surrounding homelessness has evolved, as well as members of the body. And so I very much appreciate how it's come together in this collaborative process. And through all this, I've been thinking, gee, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could approach all the big issues in this fashion? And when you went through those 3 points and how it has worked, that was really helpful, and you read my mind. I wish we could bring more of that to other issues, because finding common ground and proceeding in a way that's structured seems really productive and really great for the community as well. So thank you all so very much for your tremendous efforts.
And it would be remiss if we didn't turn to our philanthropy partners, Mr. Widener and Mr. Cervana and Michelle and the Rasmussen Foundation, because you wrote the check for the facilitators. You stepped into the breach when we needed you, and it's amazing to demonstrate how a very small targeted investment can be transformative. And so you can take that back to your boards. That big gratitude. Thank you.
I'm out of order, but yes, thank you very much.
Any other comments? Okay, I think we'll let people get back their time this afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Continue to keep those dates in mind, and remember that these handouts and that full engineering report are on the committee's website. Thank you.